the FDA gets 50% of its budget from industry, 50%. The CDC has an $11.5 billion budget, and $5 billion of that, almost half, goes to buying vaccines and then distributing them. So they're buying vaccines from the 4 companies who make all 72 vaccines now mandated for our children. They're buying them in sweetheart deals where they pay sometimes twice as much as the vaccine, as that same company can sell the vaccine in Europe. Our federal government, instead of getting a deal, is buying it at a premium. And they're all tied to each other because the agencies not only are now what you have is CDC is the biggest vaccine company in the country. It is literally buying and distributing $5 billion of vaccines a year. Not only that, but under HHS rules, all these agencies are part of HHS. So NIH, CDC, and FDA are all part of the HHS. And under HHS rules, if you are a scientist or an official who works for one of those agencies and you do work on a vaccine, you are entitled to own part of the patent. Because the vaccines are all developed by the federal government and then they are given out. The technology is then distributed to these 4 companies. And which are, by the way, Pfizer, Merck, Glaxo, and Sanofi. But you are allowed to retain a royalty. And so when that vaccine makes it to market, you are collecting money on every vial sold. Now, a couple of years ago, they changed the rules to limit the amount of money that you can make. And it's now limited to $150,000 per year per vaccine. So Tony Fauci has many, many vaccine patents. And there's one vaccine patent that he has, which is it's a way of packaging a coronavirus or some other vaccine, some other, the guts of the microbe, or the guts of the virus, rather. You can package it in a protein sheet in order to deliver it. And a scientist named Judy Mikovits devised a way of taking the HIV virus, taking the protein sheet from the HIV virus, packing it with a virus, another virus, and then delivering it through a vaccine. And it very efficiently reaches, your all of the organs that it needs to reach in order to give you immunity, supposedly. Well, Tony Fauci fired Judy Mikovits, and he somehow ended up owning that patent. And that patent is now being used by some of these companies. We don't know how many, but we know of at least one that is using it to make vaccines for the coronavirus.
Which company are you talking about? Which company?
Tony Fauci will be able to cash in not only that, but the vaccine that he made the deal for Moderna, which is going to be the first vaccine, and Gates is invested in that vaccine. That company has a 50-50 split with Tony Fauci's agency, the National Institute for Allergic Diseases. So Fauci's agency will collect half the royalties on that vaccine, and there's no limit for how much the agency can collect. So this is this is a business for these guys, and they shouldn't be regulating it. They're not regulators. They're part of it. This isn't a captured industry. This is a subsidiary of the pharmaceutical industry.
Redfield, the director of the CDC, I've been doing a lot of work on him, and it's funny what you just said. Before he went back into government, he left government in 94, 95 after he screwed up all these HIV trial vaccines, clinical trials. He was like rigging them and stuff, and we talked about that last week. He went to started this virology clinic at the University of Maryland. Gates has given this place millions upon millions upon millions of dollars, and Redfield is one of the co-founders, and now he's going to be the guy rubber stamping these vaccines for coronavirus, and Gates has a handle on that. It's insane. It's really insane.
Yeah, it's insane. And he was working in the military developing the HIV vaccine.
Right.
You had Colin Boyle, Colin Boyle's job was for CDC was to say that Agent Orange had nothing to do with, all of these leukemias and cancers that were appearing in the Vietnam veterans. In order to protect the VA and the federal government from claims by Vietnam vets that they had been made ill by Agent Orange, she got caught. She was just lying. She's what we call a biostitute. As is Fauci. They're just these hired guns that will invent and have the capacity to publish these these phony studies that exonerate industry. So she exonerated CDC and the Pentagon from the Agent Orange scandal. Then my uncle actually had, in '75, had hearings on Capitol Hill, showed that Boyle had been lying to everybody. What happens to Boyle? She gets appointed head of the vaccine program at CDC. And Redfield, who got caught red-handed, lying to Congress and lying to the American public about the efficacy of his phony HIV vaccine that everybody knew did not work. And all of this federal resources were being put into his vaccine, and he was lying and lying and lying about it. And what happened to him? He's now running CDC. And who was his assistant? Birx, who is now in the White House running the coronavirus task force with Redfield. So you have people who have fallen upwards. The way that they've gotten promoted at this agency is by lying their heads off. And they have no other good reason for holding those jobs.
And Bobby Birx, before she got this, before she was in her current position, she was at the CDC for years while all this stuff was going on. The story was Ranbaxy. Department of Justice raided Ranbaxy in Princeton, New Jersey. We're going to talk about it in other areas of this podcast. And they were showing that these guys were basically pumping poison into people all over the world, Ranbaxy. And the CDC was involved with this. She didn't do anything. She was in charge of. She could have put the brakes on these guys in India. These guys are basically criminals connected to the Clinton Foundation and Bill Gates. Okay, Birx didn't do anything. She could have put the brakes on it. It's like one scandal after another.
Well, let me tell you another thing that Tony Fauci did. I could talk about Fauci for a week. Fauci had a brilliant, two brilliant scientists working for him, Frank Rossetti and Judy Mikovits. And these are the scientists that isolated the HIV virus. There was a French scientist called Luc Montagnier who won the Nobel Prize for showing that for isolating HIV. They took it a step further, isolated it, and showed how it caused, how it was associated with AIDS. And so these guys were the most important scientists at HIV at NIH. Fauci in the 80s, Judy Mikovits discovered that there was a virus called the XMRV, the leukemia virus, that was in the blood supply, and it was associated with an outbreak of chronic fatigue syndrome, which began appearing in the 1980s. Suddenly, the medical community really acted reprehensively. It told, that it was affecting women mainly all over the country, and it was called, they dismissed it as yuppie flu. They said it was a disease from women who were trying to take corporate jobs and take responsibility, and they couldn't handle it, and that's why these women were getting sick. Well, Judy Mikovits tested the women, and she found this virus in 70% of them, and she could only find it in the control group in 4% of the general population. It was clear that this virus, this XMRV virus, had something to do with causing the outbreak of chronic fatigue syndrome. She then tried to find a source, and she found it in the blood supply. And then she found that the first outbreak had been in California at UCLA among a bunch of doctors who had given each other a polio vaccine, and the polio vaccine had been grown on a substrate of mouse brains. So they take the brain of a mouse, they masticate it, they put it in a petri dish, and then they grow a virus on it. They do it with all different kinds of animals, with bats, pangolins, etc. They happened to grow it on mouse tissue, but there was a virus in that mouse brain that had gotten into the polio vaccine, and now it was in human blood and taken out. It was now ubiquitous in the blood supply. It was being given to every American. And it was causing, not only it was causing chronic fatigue syndrome, but it was also causing leukemia. And it was causing prostate cancer. A whole different group of scientists showed that it was found in cancer, prostate cancer tumors, and in people who had leukemia. It was clearly causative. She published an article in Science saying, we know this vaccine is doing it. Then after she published that, she discovered it's coming from the vaccine. She didn't know that when she published the Science article. She went to Fauci, who was her boss, and said, holy shit, this is coming from the vaccines. We are giving all these Americans leukemia and prostate cancer and chronic fatigue syndrome. And it is going to explode. This is a national health care crisis. It's as big as AIDS. Fauci said, let me see all of your documents. He went into her office. He confiscated all of her notebooks, confiscated her hard drives, which was illegal. She had gotten a federal grant personally to study these things. He ordered her to keep her mouth shut or he was going to destroy her career. And she refused. He had her fired from NIH. He had her taken off the list where she could get federal grants. And her career's been destroyed. She's bankrupt. She's around and she's talking, and she's a brilliant scientist whose career was destroyed because Tony Fauci did not want the American public to know that he had poisoned an entire generation of Americans with a mouse retrovirus that is known to cause cancer.
How does it get away? I mean, how do they get away with this? Your dad, right? I'm a student of history. I look at your dad, and you have it in your DNA. If something's not right, you stand up for it. And even if you have to take heat for it, your dad was the same way, Bobby Kennedy, right? So you're standing up for it. But how does this guy get away with this for so many years? I can't figure it out.
You know what? Because people say to me all the time, like, what are you saying? That there's a conspiracy? And yeah, there is a conspiracy. And I can show that because we have transcripts from a 2002 meeting that they all had with each other. And I'll tell you about that in a minute. It's called the Simpsonwood meeting. But it's not, all of them aren't, like every doctor is not involved. Every doctor is militant. The vaccines, most doctors will get angry at you if you question vaccines. The whole medical establishment will, the AAP and the AMA and all of their big agencies, and, of course, all the health regulators, and then the media, which is taking all of this money. Now Roger Ailes told me that 70% of his advertising revenues during the evening news at Fox. Roger Ailes was, a guy I knew very well. He was my friend. I spent 3 months in a tent with him in Africa when I was 17 years old. I had this strange friendship with him his whole life. His child, was one of his children had a vaccine injury or an injury. And he knew that it was from the vaccines. We showed him a documentary we made. And we said, will you let me go on and talk about this? He said, I believe everything in there. I know you're right. I wish I could help, but I can't. He said, because 70% of my ad revenues comes from these 4 companies.
Right.
And, and by the way, Rupert Murdoch owns one of the biggest vaccine companies in the world. And he told me, if I let you on any of my shows, if any of my hosts let you on my shows, I would have to fire the host. And if I did not hear from Rupert in 10 minutes, that's a quote.
That's what Ailes told you. That's what Ailes told you about trying to get.
But all of them, it's not Fox. It's all CNN. Is Anderson Cooper. At the end of his show, it says sponsored by Pfizer. Aaron Burnett, sponsored by Pfizer. The NBC Nightly News is sponsored by Merck. These companies, if you look, and Roger told me this, he said typically on an NBC, on a nightly news show, there's 22 ads and 17 of them are pharma. So these guys spend their whole lives pushing flu shots, saying they're safe, telling lies about the measles vaccine. None of them are doing what a reporter is supposed to do, which is to always be in a posture of skepticism towards pronouncements by government and pronouncements by self-interested corporate officials. My father told me people in power lie. And if you're a journalist and you forget that, you should forget about being a journalist. And these people are not journalists. They're pharmaceutical company reps. That's all they are. That's all Anderson Cooper is. And now, they have 5G. Well, guess what? 5G, there's huge health problems with 5G. This isn't speculative. We have over 4,000 studies listed on my website. The NIH did its own study, $28 million, and said, yeah, it causes cancer. And the International Agency for Cancer Research has said, yeah, it causes cancer. It gives you brain tumors. So, but also, it causes DNA damage. It causes cellular damage. It causes, ADD in kids. It causes all kinds of brain injuries. It causes lowered IQs in fetuses. They're rolling out this all over the country. And guess what? CNN is owned by Warner Brothers, which is owned by AT&T. So they'll get on and they'll say again and again, Anderson Cooper, there's no problem with 5G. It's all a myth. Well, he doesn't know that. How the hell is he saying that? He hasn't read the studies. He's saying what he's told to say.
Yeah, he's told to say we know he's a puppet, Bob. You know that.
And the New York Times is owned by Carlos Slim, who made his entire fortune. Like, what is he, the 4th or 2nd richest guy in the world? He made his entire fortune on telecom. And all of these guys have these really intense telecom. The Washington Post is owned by Maureen Jobs, whose husband Stephen Jobs was another big data, big telecom guy. All of these guys, all of the big media now is controlled by big data, big telecom, and they're lying about 5G, and they're getting all their money from the 4 pharmaceutical companies, and they're lying to us about vaccines. Oh, it really is damaging to our democracy. Mike, in 1996, we passed a law in this country, or what happened to HHS, passed a regulation because it was illegal prior to that for pharmaceutical companies to advertise on TV. And the AMA was against it. Everybody said you should not let this happen because it will put those companies, not only it will have those guys doing direct to consumer advertising and telling consumers, what kind of drugs they ought to be taking instead of their doctor making dispassionate, decisions. You're telling the people, and then they go to their doctor, and 90% of the case, the doctor gives them the drug that they want. But they also said, if you allow this to happen, those companies are going to start dictating national health policy, as they're going to be able to control the media. There's only one other country in the world that allows pharmaceutical companies to advertise on TV, and that's New Zealand. The two countries that use the most drugs in the world have the highest drug prices, and we have the worst health of any industrialized nation in the world. We're behind we're behind Costa Rica. We're like at a par with Syria in terms of infant mortality, and that's the United States. So all of these vaccines have not made us healthier. They have not produced good health outcomes. And all the drugs we're getting on TV have not made us healthier. In fact, Mike, the third largest cause of death in our country today is pharmaceutical drugs, prescription drugs. That's number 3, and that's without even counting the opioid crisis. How can anybody trust these 4 companies? Okay, let me just tell you something. Those 4 companies, Glaxo, Merck, Sanofi, and Pfizer, over the past 10 years, they have paid $35 billion in penalties and damages for criminal behavior and violating civil laws to the federal government, for lying to regulators, for falsifying science, for defrauding government officials about all their other pharmaceutical drugs, and for killing hundreds of thousands of people. Vioxx, which was Merck's product, here's a pill that they marketed as a headache pill that they knew caused heart attacks. They knew it from their clinical studies. They knew it was going to kill. When we sued them, we got spreadsheets from their bean counters saying we're going to kill so many people, but even if we have to pay it off, we're still going to make a killing. Oh, most of those people who were taking Vioxx, if they knew it caused heart attacks, they would have probably said, I think I'll take an aspirin.
Yeah, exactly.
And Merck didn't tell them that. No one freaking said. Oh, they killed between 120,000 and 500,000 Americans unnecessarily killed from Vioxx. Oh, why does any of these Democrats who are now passing these vaccine mandates, how in the hell do what kind of cognitive dissonance does it require for them to say, yes, this company Merck is lying through its teeth about every single medical product and pharmaceutical drug that it markets, and they don't care about how many people they kill or injure. They only care about money. But when it comes to vaccines, they're telling the truth. They found Jesus, and they would never lie about that, even though that's the only place they can never get caught. Because the only way that they got caught with all of those other frauds that they committed, and murders, by the way, the only way they got caught is because private plaintiff's attorneys sued them on behalf of an injured client. They obtained documents during discoveries that showed criminal behavior. They walked those documents down to the U.S. Attorney's Office and said, you should prosecute these guys. And that's how they got prosecuted. Well, the only place that could never happen is with vaccines, because you can't sue them. So they can do anything they want, and no matter how grievous your injury, no matter how toxic the ingredient, no matter how sloppy their line protocols, no matter how negligent their behavior, you cannot sue them for redress. This is, we have a Seventh Amendment right. The Seventh Amendment says that any American who is harmed by a factor of more than $25 has a right to a jury trial of his peers, and that no one can take that away from him. No one shall be deprived of the right in case of controversies exceeding $25 to a trial by jury in front of their peers. That's what the Constitution says. And yet, if a vaccine company injures you, that right does not exist. You cannot sue them. It's taken away from you.
Well, listen, they're going to push and do the same thing they always do with these coronavirus vaccines now. What's your take on the Gates involvement? And they're going to push this through. It's going to go even faster than it normally goes through clinical trials. It's going to just be, it's going to be
yeah. So here's what people should be looking for. First of all, coronavirus is a very, very tricky vaccine. People have tried for decades to develop a coronavirus vaccine, and it has never worked. I'll tell you why it's never worked. Because the coronavirus, and all of I put a video up showing all of my worst critics over the years, all the biggest vaccine villains and promoters in this country, all off at Peter Hotez and Fauci himself, have all said publicly, and I've captured them all on tape, you can't make a coronavirus vaccine safely, and here's why. When they made, after the SARS epidemic in 2002, remember there were 3 SARS epidemics, 2 of them were lab created in China, 1 of them was natural. In 2002, they got together and they said, we need an international effort to create a vaccine. So they have a whole lot of people, just like today, working on a SARS coronavirus vaccine. They chose the best 4 vaccines. They gave them to animals. As it turns out, they gave them to ferrets and rats. And what happened is, ferrets get flus and coronavirus just like we do. The ferrets and the rats developed really good antibody response, which is how you get your license. You show the FDA, no vaccine is ever tested in the field. Nobody goes out and says, we're going to give the vaccine to 5,000 people and give no vaccine to 5,000 and see what happens. That never happens. The way you get a license for a vaccine is you show the FDA that you can produce an antibody response. So they produced a really strong antibody response in these ferrets. And they said, holy cow, we got a great vaccine here. This thing really works. But then they took the ferrets and they exposed them to a live virus. And the second they were exposed to that live virus, they had an hyperimmune overreaction, and it's called a paradoxical immune enhancement. Their whole bodies, every organ became immensely inflamed. Their lungs became inflamed, and they died. And at that point, the scientists said to each other, holy cow, now remember what we did with the RSV. There's a respiratory illness called RSV. And they tried to develop it very similar to coronavirus. They tried to develop a vaccine for it in the 1960s. They didn't test it on animals. They tested it on the animals. They got the immune response, but they never exposed those animals to the virus. And so they just gave it directly to children, I think 35 people, and they all became sick, and 2 of the kids died. And nobody understood then, but they said these kids had some hyperimmune response after they got exposed to the real virus, the wild virus. So we know coronavirus does that. And the only way that you can see if your particular vaccine is going to do that is if you do it on an animal model first. You have to do it to animals. Give it to animals before you give it to a human, and take those animals and expose them to the wild virus. Well, guess what? Tony Fauci and Bill Gates, at Bill Gates' direction, said, let's waive the animal studies, which is just, to me, murder. They're giving this stuff directly to human beings in Seattle, Washington, and I'm sure they did not tell them about this history.
Yeah, they started on humans. They started testing it.
They've already given it, and they never did it on animals. They skipped that whole section. Oh, what you want is, what you're looking for, Mike, is you need to have an animal studies first, and you need to have human studies with a placebo group, so that if people get sick, it will be not a subjective decision that they got, where the company that does it, it's the vaccine company that's doing these tests. So they have a lot of, reason and opportunity to lie. And the way that and to be subjective. And the way that you stop them is you have a placebo group that everybody can see. The people in the vaccine group get sicker from some, unknown sickness, even something like suicide. When they tested Gardasil, there was a huge number of suicides in the group they tested the Gardasil on. And the vaccine makers said, well, that's nothing to do with, the vaccine, because they didn't have a placebo group. So when they started giving it to young girls, we saw the suicide rate in young girls after 2006 explode in this country. It was clear from the clinical trials that that's what's going to happen if you give them all Gardasil. Oh, and they can avoid admitting that if you don't force them to have a placebo. So you got to make sure when they test it on humans, they have a true placebo. Second of all, you can't let them use exclusionary criteria, which they're doing right now. They give them only to the healthiest of the healthiest. So if people have a chronic disease, if they have diabetes, if they're smokers, if they live in a polluted area, if they drink more than 4 drinks a week, if they have multiple lovers, if they have any autoimmune disease in their family, if they've ever had a seizure, or anybody in their family has a seizure, they're not allowed in the study. But that's exactly the people you want to study, because those are the people who are likely to get sick. So they're testing it on like the Avengers, on like a group of Supermen.
You need the pre-existing conditions. You need the folks with that have other problems, because when you look at the mortality, that's what's happening.
Comorbidities and chronic diseases and all that. You want to see what it does to the population,
right?
Because when they mandate it, they're not just mandating it to the healthiest of the healthy. They're mandating it to all those sick people too. So we need to know what it's going to do to them. Anyway, I got to jump off now. But I'm happy to talk to you anytime. There's about 5 other things they ought to be doing with the vaccine testing, and I'm happy to come back anytime and talk.
Yeah, we'll do it again. I wanted to get you on because I know you've been such a fighter about this for years, and voices like yours are important now because they can't, for some reason, you explain the reasons. You can't get you out in front of millions of people on nightly news or on Fox, and it's damn unfortunate. So we'll try to do the best we can to spread what you're saying from our standpoint, and I hope folks pick up on this in the news and put it out there and share the podcast, because you have a very unique and expertise in this field, and you've been doing it for years. This isn't like you just decided to pick this up as a hobby. You know what I mean, Bobby?
Right. So ask people to follow my Instagram, and if they want to be part of the resistance, to join Children's Health Defense, because we're suing these guys, and we're going to sue Gates, and we're going to sue all of them, and Fauci. So come on board and help us.
That's what's happening.
Comorbidities and chronic diseases and all that. You want to see what it does to the population,
right?
Because when they mandate it, they're not just mandating it to the healthiest of the healthy. They're mandating it to all those sick people too. So we need to know what it's going to do to them. Anyway, I got to jump off now. But I'm happy to talk to you anytime. There's about 5 other things they ought to be doing with the vaccine testing, and I'm happy to come back anytime and talk about
it. Yeah, we'll do it again. I wanted to get you on because I know you've been such a fighter about this for years, and voices like yours are important now because they can't, for some reason, you explain the reasons. You can't get you out in front of millions of people on nightly news or on Fox, and it's damn unfortunate. So we'll try to do the best we can to spread what you're saying from our standpoint, and I hope folks pick up on this in the news and put it out there and share the podcast because you have a very unique and expertise in this field, and you've been doing it for years. This isn't like you just decided to pick this up as a hobby. You know what I mean, Bobby?
Right. So ask people to follow my Instagram, and if they want to be part of the resistance, to join Children's Health Defense, because we're suing these guys, and we're going to sue Gates, and we're going to sue all of them, and Fauci. So come on board and help us. Sue Gates, and we're going to sue all of them, and Fauci. So come on board and help us.